Hi, my name's Stuart Lynch. Do you want to build your own custom container views in SwiftUI, just like a VStack or an HStack, but with your own layout, styles, and logic? Well, in this video, I'll walk you through everything that you need to know to create flexible, powerful containers that can even hold state and accept closures. 4 years ago, almost to the date, I released a video on understanding SwiftUI ViewBuilders. I covered a number of topics, but one of them was using ViewBuilders to create your own custom containers that contain your own custom implementation of things that behave like other containers, like an HStack or a VStack, where you can enclose a number of views within a container view, and the layout is handled by the container. So in the case of an HStack, the views are laid out horizontally, and in a VStack vertically. Well, there are optional arguments that you can supply, such as alignment and spacing. So in this video, we covered how to create your own custom container. I'll leave a link in the description. In iOS 18 and macOS 15, SwiftUI exposed two new arguments for container view, and those are container values and container sections that we can use to simplify and enhance our custom container views. However, since this was such a long time ago, and because container values and container sections depend on a better understanding of how to create a custom container, I thought that I'd create another video on creating container views and go into more depth in this one. We'll start by creating a simple container view that will allow us to present multiple views in a VStack and have that VStack enclosed in a rounded rectangle with a blue fill and a shadow. And then we'll introduce arguments with default values that can be overridden so as to change the colors and the symbol used in the view. As in many cases with SwiftUI, there is more than one way to do things. So I'll show you how you can accomplish that exact same thing with a custom view modifier. Well, what view modifiers can't do, however, is hold state, while containers can. So you'll see in this third view that the toggle for the container view is contained within the container and not within the hosting view. And the other thing that view modifiers can't do is inject logic by way of closures, like I do here, where the buttons on this confirmation form, which is a container view, are disabled or active based on a status property injected into the container, and the actions for the buttons are passed in as closures. Well, I have a starter project for this video, so if you want to work along with me, you can find it on GitHub. A link's in the description. There's a starter project branch that contains the starter project. The completed branch contains the completed source code, so make sure that you download the zip file for the starter branch if you want to work along. So let's get started by creating a new folder called Container Views Plus, because we're going to add more things in here besides a container view. Inside there, create a new file and call it Special Container View. Change the import to SwiftUI. And then create a new struct called Special Container View. What we want to pass onto this container view are a bunch of other views that will be our content, and it may be a mix of things like text views and buttons and images, or whatever. But in all cases, the content will be views of some sort. And since we don't know what this content will be ahead of time, we can use generics here and simply specify that the content with a capital C is a view. And we want this to conform to the view protocol as well. Well, then we can create a stored property called content that will hold whatever views that we pass into this new container. Because content, capital C, is generic, it can be any type of view. Well, in my previous videos, I followed Apple's examples by creating an initializer for this content. But since it can be in a mixture of different types of views, we need to annotate the content with a view builder. And since the view is going to be a closure, we'll need to define it as a closure that will return the content. And then in the body, we can assign to the content the result of that closure. So the body then, which is a requirement for view, will start off with that content that we can manipulate in any way that we want. Now, I found this syntax really confusing, so I created a short 2-minute video on this that you may want to watch. I'll leave a link in the description. And after posting that video to a number of different socials, I got a comment from Diego Costa on X with a much more understandable way of doing this. Instead of having the initializer, I can just annotate the content with @ViewBuilder and remove the initializer altogether. That is so much simpler. Well, we can also add a preview to this view, and we can do that simply by using the preview macro. Well, when you do that, you'll see that the body of the preview is a special container with an argument of content, and this can be a trailing closure with multiple views. So we can replace that simply with a pair of braces, just like an H stack or a V stack. And then within that trailing closure, I can add whatever views that I want. So for example, 2 different text views. Well, great. This means then I can return to my simple custom container view and wrap the text view that's there inside a special container, and nothing changes. Let's add a second text view like this. What happens if I pass in another view, like an image? What you're seeing is the views are presented as a VStack, because even without this container, that's what you'd get. It's what SwiftUI does if you fail to specify a container type. But let's return to our special container struct now, though, and specifically wrap the content in a VStack. And then add some padding. I'm going to apply a background of a rounded rectangle with a corner radius of 10. I'll add a fill of the color blue and apply a gradient. And then I'm going to change the foreground style to white. And then apply a shadow with a radius of 5. If you return to your simple container view, you'll see that it has been applied there as well. Now, if you want to be more flexible, let's try cutting out our star image view from the view and put it in our special container struct. I can add it after the content because we're in a VStack. And if I go back to the special container view, you'll see that it still looks the same with that star there as well. So let's get more flexible with our simple container view with some optional values. Now I say optional, but really they won't be because I'm going to provide default values. So let's create 3 new properties in special container, and I'm going to add them before the content and make sure that they are vars. Otherwise, if you assign default values, you won't be able to change them if you've used lets when you create a new instance of this container view. So I'm going to create one for BG color, which is a color, and I'll set the default to that blue color that we used. I'm going to create one for foreground color, so FG color, which is another color, and the default here is going to be white. And then the third one will be for the SF symbol, and it's going to be a string where the default is a star. So now we can go into our body and we can replace those hard-coded values with our body. So the star will be SF symbol. The blue in the fill will be BG color. And our foreground style's white color will be replaced with the FG color. And you can see that the preview still works. Nothing has changed. And if I return to our tab view, we see it still works there too. So let's enclose this special container here inside a VStack. And I'm going to create a second one. You now see that our so-called optional properties are gray, which means that they do have a default value already assigned. But we can change these. So if I hold down the Option key on the keyboard, all of them will be selected. And when I hit Enter, I now can specify values for each one of those properties. So for example, for the BG color, I can specify red. For the FG color, how about yellow? And for the SF symbol, it's a string representing an SF symbol, so I'm going to specify the Apple logo. And if I press Enter on the content, you get the closure where we can add whatever views we want. The logo's already been added. And whatever we add to the content, though, will be added above. So for example, a text view that says, "Hello, Apple." And then below that, a link where the title key will be the Apple website. And the destination is going to be a URL. And I'm going to use the string for the Apple website. And I'll have to unwrap it. Let me also apply a large title to the text view. Now let me run this on the simulator because I want to actually see if that link actually works. So I'm going to make sure I have my iPhone 16 Pro on my Xcode selected, run it in the simulator. When it launches, it's the first tab view. I can tap on that link and I'm taken to the Apple website. Do you want to seriously level up your coding skills without staring at dry textbooks or boring lectures? Well, Brilliant is one of the best ways that I found to learn computer science and math through hands-on interactive lessons. So instead of passively watching videos, you'll solve fun puzzles and challenges that actually make you think like a programmer. I've really enjoyed their algorithm fundamentals and computer science foundations courses. They're perfect if you want to strengthen your logic and problem-solving skills, or even prep for technical interviews. And right now, you can get started for free, and the first 200 people to sign up at brilliant.org/StuartLynch will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium. So check it out. You'll honestly have a lot of fun learning complex concepts. There are many similarities between custom container views and custom view modifiers. And I have a couple of videos on view modifiers that you can check out. I'll leave links in the description. What I'd like to do is to replicate the exact same container view in this second view, but this time I'm going to use a custom view modifier. So in the container views plus folder, I'm going to create a new Swift file, and I'm going to call it special view modifier. I'm going to change the import to SwiftUI, and then I'll create a new struct called special view modifier, and it's going to conform to the ViewModifier protocol. This requires a body function that will accept content. Does that argument look a little bit familiar? And it returns some view. So initially, I'm just going to return the content. So let me go back to the special container view, and I'm just going to copy the 3 properties from here and return to my special view modifier, and I'm going to paste that into the top. Now I'm going to change these to lets now. I don't need them to be vars. And I'm going to remove the default values here because shortly I'll create an extension to the view where I'll be putting these back in. So I'm going to return again to the container view and copy the body content, as that's the same kind of content that we're going to have in our view modifier. So I can return to the view modifier and just replace the content with that content that I copied. And then, as I said, I'm going to make it more Swifty by creating an extension to view. And within here, I'm going to create a function using the same name as my view modifier, but I'll make it lowercase. And here, I'm going to need 3 parameters that will be identical to the properties, but it's here that I'm going to define or supply the default values. So BG color will be a color with the default value of blue. FG color, another color, the default value of white. And then SF symbol, which is a string, the default value of star. And it's going to return some view. And then in the body, because this is a view, we can apply the modifier function and return it, passing in the special view modifier and match up the properties with the parameters of our function. So if I go to the custom view modifier tab now, I'm going to replace this text view. And what I want to use is the same views that I use in our special container view, but we'll still need some kind of container. So I'm going to start just by using a VStack. And then I can go back to the Container View tab, the view, and copy those two text views and paste them in here. There's simply two views in the VStack, but now I can apply the View modifier and simply accept the default value, so not provide any different ones. Great. For the second one then, I can embed this in a VStack and then create another VStack. I'm going to go back to our Container View tab then and copy the text view and the link from the second special container. Back in the custom container view now, I'm going to apply the View modifier, but this time I'm going to supply override values for the defaults. And I want those to be the same ones I used in my container view. So a BG color of red, a foreground color of yellow, and an SF symbol of Apple logo. Perfect. It's exactly the same as what we had in our container view. So why do we need container views then if we can do the same thing with a view modifier? Well, container views can do more, and I want to show you this in these next two tabs. In the state container view that I'm displaying here, I've got a scroll view displaying some text. And that text is just some random lorem ipsum that I've created, and that's stored in my constants enum file here. And the scroll view currently doesn't scroll because I've applied the scroll bounce behavior modifier based on size, which means it'll only scroll if it needs to. What I want to do is to add a header above this view that will have a toggle to expand and reveal more information about what I have in this text view. I want the state of that toggle, though, to be controlled not by this view, but by the container view itself. And that's only something that a view can do. It can hold state, whereas view modifiers can't. So inside the container views plus folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it toggle container. I'll import SwiftUI, and then I can create a generic container view, same name, and expand on it. So we'll create a toggle container, specify that it will contain the content, capital C, that is a view, and conform the struct to the view protocol. And then we can create a content property annotated with ViewBuilder. And since this is a struct that conforms to the view protocol, we're going to have a body property that is some view, and I can simply return the content, which we'll modify shortly. But let's also create a preview for this. And again, we can use the toggle container that has a trailing closure, so we can simply use the trailing closure syntax with the two braces and provide a couple of text views so that we can see what our design is going to look like. So let's go back then and build on our content. Well, I want this view to have a Boolean property that I can toggle. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to call it isExpanded and set it to false. It's a state property. And then the content that we'll be providing in the closure will only be visible if the isExpanded is true. So I'm going to wrap that content with an if statement. I also want to supply a string that I can use as a label. So I can create that as a property for my view. And of course, I'll need to fix the preview now, as it must receive a string for the label. So we'll just specify a string header. So now we can embed that conditional content inside a VStack. And I'm going to apply an alignment of leading. But then as the first view in the VStack, I'm going to create a toggle where the title key is the label that we're passing in. And isOn is bound to our state isExpanded property. I'll apply a font of headline to the toggle, and I'm going to add some padding of 5 to the bottom. Now in the VStack, I'm going to add some padding. I'm also going to add a background, and I'm going to use a UI color of System Gray 6. I'll add a corner radius of 10. And then I'm going to supply an animation where the animation is the default animation, but the value is based on the isExpanded state property. And now that I've got an animation, I can then say that the content transition is going to be the opacity case. That's our view modifier completed. So let's go to the state container view now. And in the VStack above the scroll view, I'm going to create one of those toggle container views. And for the label, I'm going to supply the string references. In the closure, which is a view closure, we can supply as many views of any type that we like, or even another container view. But I'm just going to supply a VStack. And inside there, I'm going to provide 3 text views that might be my references. So just 3 simple text views of reference 1, reference 2, and reference 3. And then to the VStack itself, I'll apply a headline font and a foreground style of gray. Now you can see when I toggle the toggle, the view expands to reveal my references. And you can see that the scroll view, once expanded, is now scrolling because its content has exceeded the space available. However, when we collapse, it no longer scrolls. For the final example then, let's go to the Action Container tab view. And here you see that I have a form where the text fields are bound to a string and an int. And there's also a Boolean state property called form submitted that, once it is true, will hide the form and simply display the form submitted text view. Now this might be something I'll do a lot, so I want to create a reusable confirmation container view that'll supply me with a confirm or cancel button. But I want those actions to vary from case to case, so I want to be able to pass those actions to the container view as closures from this view. So in the container views folder, create a new file and call it confirmable container view. Import SwiftUI. It should be familiar now. Let's create a new struct called confirmable container view with the generic content as a view. And I'm going to make sure it conforms to the view protocol. And this will automatically give us the body property right away. So instead of this string, I want to supply it with some content that can be multiple views. So we'll need to create a content property annotated with ViewBuilder. And that's what we'll return in the body. And let's also create a preview using the preview macro with a trailing closure. And we'll just simply add a couple of text views here. So let's return now and fix up our content. So I'm going to embed that content in a VStack with a spacing of 20. And below that, I'm going to create an HStack. And there's where I'm going to put my 2 buttons. And the first one, the label will be cancel. And I'm going to specify a rule of destructive. I'll just leave the action for now. I'll add a spacer. And then create a second button where the label is going to be confirm. And again, I'm just going to leave the action. And then to the entire HStack, I'm going to apply a button style of bordered prominent. I'll add some top padding of 10. And then to the entire VStack, I'm going to apply more padding. and then a background using a UI color of System Gray 6, corner radius of 12, and some horizontal padding. Now I want to be able to disable those buttons if the form is empty, and I want to have the Submit button only enabled if the form is complete. And if we have any information in our forms, then we want to be able to clear them. Now this view has no idea about the form itself, so I'll need to pass something into this view telling me what the state of the form is. So I'm going to create an enum outside of this view, and I'm going to call that enum status. And I'm going to give it 3 cases: empty, incomplete, and complete. Then I'm going to create a binding called status that is of type status. We're going to need to update the preview too, so let me just supply a constant of incomplete here. Well, we can set the cancel button to be disabled if the status is the empty case. No point in canceling something that hasn't been done. But for the confirm button, we want to be able to disable it if there are 2 cases. Status is empty or the status is incomplete. So what we can do is we can create an array of those 2 cases, status.empty, status.incomplete, and see if that array contains our status. And then the final thing that we need to do is to create 2 closures that we can pass in from our form view that we can execute as actions. So one will be a confirm action, which is a simple closure. And the second will be a cancel action. And the preview is also going to have to be updated. And I find that the best way to do this is to remove the existing one and start all over again. But first, let me copy those 2 text views to the clipboard. And I'll delete the preview. And then if I start again with the preview macro, I can then use a constant of, say, empty for the status. If I tap enter on the content closure, the other action closures get changed to trailing closures as well. But in my content, I can paste those 2 text views into the constant. And I can leave the actions empty for the preview. And then finally, we can call those closures in our actions. So the cancel action gets called for the cancel button, and the confirm action for the confirm button. So now we can go to our action container view. But before we add our confirmable container view, we'll need to make sure that we have a state property for our status that we can pass into our view. And since our form has not yet been touched, we can use a status of empty as the initial value. So now we can create our confirmable container within the if clause below the form. And that status will be bound to our status property. Tapping enter on the content will give us our 3 closures. And that first content is the closure that we can supply our views. And I'm going to supply 2 text views. The first will be a text view with the string, do you want to proceed? And I'll apply a headline font. And for the second, another text view, this action cannot be undone. And this time I'll supply a subheadline font and a foreground style of gray. Well, the status is going to change based on whether or not one or more of the fields have values in them. So we'll have to observe those changes. So I'm going to create a function called update status. And then I'm going to create a tuple and switch on that tuple. And that tuple has to have Boolean properties. And my 2 Boolean properties are going to be the case of whether or not name is empty, true or false, or age is equal to nil. Again, true or false. So in the case of true, meaning the name is empty and the age is nil, the status is going to be empty. In the case of true, false, meaning no name, but there is an age, the status will be incomplete. And the same is going to be the case for false, true. We've got something in the name, but no age has been set. The status will be incomplete. The only other option is true, true. So we can just use a default here and specify that the status will be complete. So now we can create an onChange modifier for name and age. And for the action, the closure will simply call the update status function. So one for name and one for age. The other thing that we need to do is to have a function to clear the form, and this will be done when we tap the clear button and after we submit. So I'm going to call the function clear form, and I'll set the name to an empty string and the age back to nil. We have everything we need now to complete the actions that we want for our buttons in the confirmable container view. First, the confirm action, we will do whatever logic is necessary when we submit the form, and this will be different for every single implementation. So first we'll set the form submitted to true so that it's going to hide the form, and then clear the form so that it's always empty if we present it again. And for the cancel action, we just need to call clear form. And you can see if we test, initially both action buttons are disabled, but as soon as I enter something into the name field, the clear button is enabled and tapping it will clear the form. Same thing with age. But if I complete the form by entering content in both, the confirm button is enabled, and when I tap on it, the submission will be done and the form will disappear, revealing that text view that is there. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment. You can subscribe to my channel to get notifications of new videos, and remember that you can also download my YouTube channel listing app for free and quick access to all of my 350 plus YouTube videos. A link's in the description. And also remember I have a full SwiftUI course available on my Teachable site where you learn how to build a fun multi-targeted app.